Hey guys. Tonight's story begins with a fire that refuses to stay awake. A draft that feels less like weather and more like a hand on your neck. And a silence that's clearly up to something. You're wrapped in a blanket that smells like wet sheep and regret, trying to convince yourself you'll drift off anyway. But then you hear it. Not quite a scream, not quite a cry, just the kind of sound that makes your bones vote against survival. You tell yourself it's a fox or a neighbor or literally anything else, but deep down you know the truth. Death doesn't knock in this world. It screams outside your door until you open it. But before you get too cozy, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. It's oddly comforting to know who else is drifting off, while the Banshee wails somewhere in the distance. And if you feel like fueling these midnight hauntings, you can always buy me a coffee, the only thing keeping me awake long enough to listen for the next scream. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. The fire is low, flickering against the stone walls like it's trying to stay awake. Outside, the wind presses its cold breath against the shutters, and you can't tell if it's just the breeze or something older, heavier, pressing in. You're wrapped in a rough wool blanket that smells faintly of ash, sheep, and sleep. The world is dark and still, not the comforting kind of stillness. No, this is the kind that listens. A hush with ears. The kind of quiet that comes just before something happens. Your eyelids sag, your thoughts wander, and for a moment, you let go. You drift, almost dreaming, and then you hear it. At first, you think it's a fox, or maybe a bird, some lonely night creature calling out to another in the dark. But it doesn't stop. It rises, trembles. It doesn't belong in the throat of any animal you know. It's not a scream, it's not a cry. It's both, drawn out, stretched over the bones of the night, like wet linen pulled tight to dry. It shakes something loose in your chest before you even understand what you're hearing. Not with your ears, exactly, but with your bones. It scrapes down your spine like the edge of a rusted blade. You sit up. The fire is nearly dead now. The room has gone colder, and your breath curls like smoke in the air. You're not alone, but you don't feel company. You feel watched. You feel mourned. The wail continues. It moves, drifting through the air like mist, curling under the doorframe, whispering through the cracks in the wood. And suddenly, it isn't outside anymore. It's inside, not just in the room, in you. You've heard stories. Everyone has. Tales passed around the hearth, half joking, half whispered. About the Banshee, the Beansita, the fairy woman, she of the mound, the one who weeps for the dying. You always thought it was just a story, a bedtime thrill, a way for grandmothers to scare children into closing the shutters and saying their prayers. You told yourself that if you ever heard it, you'd laugh, you'd throw salt at the windows, you'd go back to sleep. But now you can't even breathe. The sound pierces you. Not like a dagger, but like grief. It's unbearable because it's familiar. It sounds like the moment before someone says they didn't make it. It sounds like the cry that escapes your mother's throat when she finds the bed empty. It sounds like the howl you gave once on your knees in the dark after they closed the lid. It sounds like loss, old loss, and it doesn't want to be forgotten. You stand. Slowly, legs shaking. The floor is cold, hard-packed earth with scattered straw, and your toes curl instinctively. The fire spits a final ember. Your shadow stretches against the wall, twitching. Outside, the wind has stopped entirely. Everything has. The world is holding its breath. Listening, you open the door. You don't want to, but something compels you. Something beyond curiosity, something like recognition. There's a woman at the edge of the trees. You don't see her clearly, but she's there. A shape in the moonlight, pale, draped in something long and tattered that moves like smoke. Her head is bowed, and her hair hangs like tangled silver thread. You can't see her face. You don't want to. She isn't looking at you. She's looking through you, past you, as if mourning someone already gone. The scream rises again. You fall to your knees. Your ears feel wet. Are you bleeding, or is it just the pressure? You close your eyes, but the sound doesn't leave. It blooms inside your skull like a poisonous flower. You want to run, but you know you're not supposed to. People say if you run, she follows. And if she follows, she finds. And if she finds you, someone dies. There's a heaviness in the air now, like the moment before a storm, but colder. You know, in that old part of your soul that never had a name, that you've just been marked. That the wail wasn't meant to scare you. It was meant to warn you, to prepare you. It's not about you, but it's near you, close enough. You want to believe she's just a story, a myth sewn into the fabric of a superstitious world. But this is a world where death is constant, where babies don't always wake, and fever comes without reason, and a stubbed toe can kill, where the wind doesn't whisper, but it remembers. The Banshee isn't a fantasy. She's a function, a part of the natural order, like wolves, or rot, or time. She doesn't come for the wicked. She doesn't come for the brave. She comes for the ones she's meant to, when it's time, when the veil thins, when the air gets heavy, and the animals go silent, and even the trees seem to hold back their rustling out of respect. She comes when the breath before the last one has already been drawn, and you've just heard her. The wail fades, slow and cruel, as if being drawn back into the soil itself. The woman in the trees is gone. You don't know when she left. You don't know if she was ever really there. But the silence she leaves behind is worse than the sound. You feel it in your teeth, in your stomach, in the way your skin prickles like it's trying to crawl off your bones. You stumble back into the cottage. The fire is dead. The room is darker than it was before. Or maybe you're just seeing differently now. There's a weight to everything. The walls, the air, even your name feels heavier on your tongue. Someone in this house is going to die. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. The Banshee doesn't lie. She doesn't come for amusement. She only comes when she's needed. You crawl under the blanket and stare at the ceiling. You don't sleep. You just wait. You've just heard the wail, and death is coming. In the medieval world, death didn't tiptoe. It didn't wear soft shoes or creep through alleys with a blade tucked under its cloak. It announced itself, loudly, sometimes through the slam of a plague cart, sometimes in the wet cough of your only child, and sometimes, when the air was still and the night pressed in, it arrived on a scream. Not just any scream, the kind that didn't belong to a throat, a sound torn from the gap between worlds, a wail so drenched in mourning, so cracked with centuries of sorrow that it didn't just say someone was going to die. It said death was already here, sitting at the hearth, warming its hands while you looked the other way. The Banshee didn't knock. She cried. That was her entrance. That was her presence. That was her message. And she didn't need to speak your language because her voice was older than language. The word we use now, Banshee, is a polished remnant, smoothed by centuries and anglicized tongues. But in Old Irish, she was the Bean Seeda, the woman of the fairy mound, Bean meaning woman, Seedhe, pronounced like she, meaning the fairy folk, or more precisely, the ancient hidden people, believed to dwell in the barrow mounds that dotted the countryside like forgotten teeth. These mounds weren't just dirt and stone. They were thresholds, between now and then, between life and the other thing, The Banshee was not a ghost in the way modern horror understands ghosts. She didn't haunt the unlucky or possess the innocent. She didn't scratch cryptic warnings into steamed windows. She wasn't malevolent. But she wasn't merciful either. She was grief with lungs, a funeral dirge wrapped in skin. Sometimes she was a young maiden in white, with streaming red hair, her eyes rimmed with endless sorrow. Other times, she appeared as a shriveled crone, her face a collapsed cathedral of wrinkles, her mouth perpetually open in a scream that never ended. She changed shape, she adapted, but she was always mourning someone. In Ireland, she was most commonly linked to the noble families, the O'Neills, the O'Briens, the O'Connors, and so on. Like a dreadful inheritance passed down alongside family crests and long, complicated grudges. To hear her cry was to know someone in your bloodline was about to stop breathing, and you couldn't stop it. You couldn't change it. The Banshee wasn't a negotiator. She was an announcer, the medieval town crier of the damned. Her voice carried across fields and forests, down stone corridors and through broken thatch, and no one ever mistook it for something else. You could lie to yourself in the daylight, sure. But when the sun slipped behind the hills and the chill crawled in through the shutters, even the brave admitted it. If you heard her, someone was already gone. They just didn't know it yet. Folklore wasn't escapism back then. It was framework. It was how people explained things they couldn't control, which, to be clear, was almost everything. Disease, childbirth, weather, war. Death was constant, and medieval Europe was the perfect breeding ground for myth, because reality was already terrifying, and the Banshee didn't come from nowhere. She came from the keening women, the professional mourners, real human beings, paid in bread, coin, or drink, to weep and wail at funerals. It sounds theatrical, maybe even grotesque, but it wasn't. It was necessary. In a world with no grief counselors, no therapists, no way to process the endless churning of loss, these women gave pain a sound. They screamed for the ones who couldn't. They cried because someone had to. Over time, that ritual became legend. Those women became one woman, singular, otherworldly, and she outlived them all. You see, a Banshee wasn't just a spirit. She was an embodiment of mourning that had nowhere else to go. And because medieval culture treated grief like a curse, something to be contained, whispered about, avoided, the Banshee became terrifying, not because she was evil, but because she was too honest. She didn't knock gently on your door and tell you your uncle passed peacefully in his sleep. She shrieked, she howled, she bent the air. She made you feel it in your teeth and behind your eyes and in the marrow of your spine. In Scotland, the legend shifted but didn't disappear. There she was, the Bean Niga, the washerwoman at the ford, seen scrubbing bloodied garments that belonged to someone who had not yet died. If you saw her, it meant doom, yours or someone else's. But again, the theme remained. Woman, alone, tied to death, weeping before the dying even knew they were dying. The imagery was consistent. The femininity, the mourning, the loneliness of it, as if sorrow had chosen a single figure to wear, and she kept showing up in every village, under different names, with the same broken song. There's something gothic about her, but not in the cinematic sense. Not corsets and candlelight. No, this is the real gothic. The slow rot, the dread that seeps into your skin before you realize you've opened the door. The Banshee isn't theatrical. She's weather. She's part of the landscape. The kind of fear that settles in your house like dust and won't leave no matter how hard you scrub. She's in the wind that changes direction suddenly, in the stillness before the dog starts barking at nothing, in the way the air feels heavier than it should. You'd like to think we've moved beyond this kind of thing, that in the modern age we can trace all fears back to data and neurons and the predictable failure of biology. But even now, in the dead hours, when the house creaks a little too much and your phone's light flickers for no reason, something primitive still twitches in your brain, because you know that death doesn't always arrive like a doctor in a white coat. Sometimes, it shows up screaming, and that scream doesn't echo. It anchors. It stays with you long after it fades. It unzips something under your ribs and lets the cold in. That's the Banshee's gift. She doesn't kill you. She makes you aware. And once you've heard her, you never unhear her. Because death might not always come with a sound, but when it does, it wails. You wake up because something is crying, not sobbing, not weeping gently into cloth, crying like a wound, crying like grief has teeth and is chewing its way out. At first, your mind tries to fold it into a dream, something half-remembered and rotten, full of dead relatives and crows. But then the sound cuts through again, thinner this time, sharper. You're not dreaming. The straw beneath you itches your legs through the threadbare linen. You sit up. The air inside the cottage is wet with cold and the smell of peat smoke, stale milk, and sheep dung. Something shifts in the dark corner of the room. Probably a rat. Probably. Your breath rises in faint wisps. The hearth has burned down to a soft orange glow under ash. The wind outside is low but constant, like the world is exhaling and forgot how to stop. You listen. There it is again, that cry. It doesn't come from the village. It doesn't belong to a person. It rides the edge of the wind, but moves like it has a destination. You strain your ears. No footsteps. No hooves. Just the sound, just the cry, looping again, rising and falling, as though something outside is mourning on a rhythm older than time. You tell yourself it's a fox, maybe a hare being dragged by a hound. You lie like that to yourself for a while. The cottage you wake up in is older than your memory. It was built by someone with hands like bark and knees that always hurt when it rained. The walls are dry stone, fitted without mortar, the kind that keeps the wind out but never the cold. The thatch roof leaks when it storms. The only light comes from the hearth or the moon. There are no windows, just a wooden door swollen by damp, a latch made from bone and twine, and a hole in the roof to let the smoke out and the rain in. This is where you live. This is where you survive. This is where the Banshee came to scream. Morning hasn't arrived yet, but it's close. You can feel the pressure of it, the slow drip of blue into the black sky beyond the cracks in the roof. In the summer, dawn comes like a soft breath. But now, it's winter, or close enough. And dawn drags itself into the sky with bruises under its eyes. You pull on a woolen tunic that smells like sweat and sheep and salt. You piss in a clay bowl in the corner. You try not to look at the bed where your brother is still asleep. You don't want to know if he's breathing. Not yet. Outside the cottage, everything is damp. The path to the barn is mud, not dirt. The fence has holes chewed in it by time, rot, and something with claws. You can see your breath in the air, curling upward like it wants to escape your mouth and tell the others what's coming. The cry is closer now. You look around, but you don't see anything. No woman in white. No crone with red eyes. Just the black outlines of hills, the hunched backs of trees, and the occasional flicker of a torch in the far distance. The village sleeps on, or pretends to. Your neighbors believe in things they can't name, not gods necessarily. Those belong to the church, and the church is a place you only go when you're born, married, or dead. No, what you believe in is the sound in the trees, the feel of the earth when it shifts under your feet, the way milk curdles for no reason, the sudden stillness of birds, the cold breath on your neck when you're alone in the field. You believe in things that don't ask for prayers. They ask for respect. You remember what your grandmother said before she died, that the crying woman only comes before someone goes, that she isn't evil, just old, older than the church, older than the saints, older than the first name your people carved into bark. She wails because death is near, not to scare you, to warn you. It's a courtesy, really, if you believe in that sort of thing. You didn't. Until now. Your mother's spinning wheel is tucked in the corner, its spindle still streaked with flax. There are dried herbs tied above the door. Wormwood, yarrow, elder. None of them matter. Not anymore. You walk to the door and press your palm against it. It's trembling. No, not the door. Your hand. You press your ear to the wood, and for a moment, the sound is so clear it could be inside your skull. A cry like wet fabric tearing, like bone being ground to dust under the weight of sorrow. It doesn't stop. You want it to stop. You'd give anything for it to stop. But you also know what happens when it does. When the wail ends, silence settles in like fog, and the next sound you hear is someone's name spoken too softly, or a cough that doesn't go away, or the clatter of a bowl dropping because the hands holding it suddenly forgot how to hold. That's the part no one talks about. That the scream isn't the worst of it. You step outside. The wind wraps around your legs like it's trying to trip you. The soil beneath your feet is soft and slick, the kind of soft that swallows footprints and secrets. You look toward the trees, then the hills, then the barrow beyond the river. That's where the old ones are buried, the ones who built the first homes, before the church, before the English, before history started pretending it had rules. You wonder if the cry comes from there. If she walks between the stones with her hair dragging behind her like a bridal train made of shadows, you don't see her. You don't have to. The sound is enough. It coils into your ears and settles behind your ribs. It doesn't feel like hearing anymore. It feels like remembering. Something that belongs to you, or maybe always did. You go back inside. You shut the door, but it doesn't help. The crying seeps through stone, through wood, through the holes in your beliefs. You sit on the edge of your straw bed and stare at the fire. You don't wake the others. You don't speak. You just listen. Because now, you know, it's starting. You live in a world where people die before they get old enough to have regrets. They die before they have time to rot properly, before their names are remembered long enough to carve into stone, if there was ever stone to carve. They die in childbirth, in fields, in bogs, in beds shared with 5 others. They die coughing into rags that used to be shirts. They die with their hands still wrapped around tools or spoons or each other. They die at night, mostly, when the wind gets in and the warmth gets out. You've never known a world where death was rare. You've only known a world where death is regular, like the sun rising or bread going moldy, predictable, inevitable, close. The plague came once. Then it came again. It doesn't need an invitation. It travels on fleas and wind and pilgrims and bad luck. The first time it arrived, it made no announcement. Just a sore here, a swelling there, and within days the house was silent. The second time, people knew what to expect, and it made it worse. They dug graves before symptoms started. Whole families vanished into ditches lined with lime and loose prayers. The priests stopped ringing bells. The bells made it real. Sometimes they still ring in your ears at night, even when no one's dying, but someone always is. Famine is slower, meaner. It doesn't kill fast like the fever. It takes its time, whittling the body down from the inside. You watch your fingers become bones. You watch your mother measure barley like it's gold dust. You learn that hunger has phases: gnawing, aching, floating, silence. Eventually, you stop being hungry and start being light. That's the phase where people die smiling, their bodies too tired to panic, their minds already gone elsewhere. The church tells you all of it is a test, that suffering refines the soul, that pain on earth is nothing compared to eternal paradise, if you just behave. But the ones who suffer most don't seem to be the wicked. It's the old woman who never cursed, the baby who never sinned, The young man who never took more than his share of turnips. They die just like the thieves and the drunkards. Maybe faster, maybe louder. And in that landscape of dying, where the veil between breath and stillness is gossamer thin, the Banshee makes perfect sense. She doesn't need to invent tragedy. She doesn't even exaggerate it. She just gives it a sound. In a world where death comes unannounced, she announces it. Where grief has no room to stretch its legs, she screams until the earth listens. The first time you heard about her, you were too young to understand what dying really meant. You thought it was just another story to hush the dark. But then you saw the body of your cousin laid out on the table with his eyes still open, and you remembered the sound from 2 nights before. The wail, the keening. You remembered the way the dog wouldn't stop barking, the way the candle refused to stay lit. People believe in omens, not because they're foolish, but because they're desperate to find shape in the chaos. If death must come, let it at least come with a signal. Let it give you one more night to hold someone's hand, one more hour to speak their name with warmth instead of memory. You've seen families hang crucifixes made of straw and nails. You've seen rowan twigs bound with red thread over every doorway. You've watched your father spit 3 times after mentioning death, just in case it was listening. None of it stops what's coming. But it helps you believe there's some pattern to it all, that you're not entirely helpless, that maybe the Banshee wails not because she's cruel, but because no one else knows how to mourn properly anymore. You've watched a woman scream into a river because her child died and no one else was left to bury him. You've seen a man claw at the dirt with bare hands because the ground froze too hard to dig. There are moments when grief overwhelms language, and that's when the Banshee arrives, not always in form, sometimes just in sound. Sometimes she lives in the mouths of the living who've lost too much. Sometimes she uses your voice when you don't know what else to say. The cottage next to yours has been silent for 3 days. The chimney hasn't smoked. The door hasn't opened. They say the mother fell sick and took the youngest with her. The others left or starved or followed. No one checks. No one wants to know. If the Banshee cried, no one heard her. Or maybe everyone did, and that's why no one's speaking. There's a grief that silences, and a grief that screams, and the Banshee has always belonged to the second kind, the louder kind, the ancient, untamed, unrefined kind. You remember funerals that felt more like chores. Wrap the body, say the prayers, cover the eyes, carry them out, stack the dirt, move on, because there are more mouths to feed, more children to watch, more beds to clean. There is no time to stop. But the Banshee stops. She marks the moment. She opens her throat and reminds the land that something has ended, that a thread has been cut, that this person mattered enough to wail over. People feared her, but they also understood her. They made room for her, the way you make room for a storm or a birth. She was part of it all. She didn't kill. She didn't curse. She witnessed. She wailed. She turned pain into music, awful as it was. In a world where everyone walked with one foot already in the grave, she was the only thing that warned you where the edge was. Now, when you hear her, and you do, you will. You don't run. You don't beg. You listen. You open the door. You face the night. You let the sound in. Because here, in this world, death is everywhere. And the Banshee is just trying to make sure you don't forget. You hear it again, and this time there's no mistaking it. It's not the wind clawing through the heather or a fox screaming from some thorn-thick grove. It's not the old woman 2 cottages over, the one who mutters into her stew and cries for her dead husband. This is different. It's thinner and deeper all at once, like sorrow and rage got tangled in a single note and forgot how to unravel. It carries, not through distance but through bone. You feel it in your teeth, in the backs of your knees, in the soft patch behind your ears that no one touches anymore. It latches on, and what's worse is you know what it means. The moment you hear the wail, time splits in half. There's the before, the silence, the guessing, the maybe not. And then there's the after. The moment she screams, the game changes. Someone you love is going to die. Not might, not could, will. It doesn't matter if they're young or strong or sleeping peacefully under two furs and a St. Bridget's cross. The wail has been given, and that means the clock is ticking. There is no reversal, no appeal, no bargains under the ash tree or whispered prayers that can cancel the sound. The Banshee doesn't wait for your permission. You don't tell anyone you've heard it. Not yet. Because the moment you speak it aloud, it becomes more real. You keep it in your chest like a fever, hoping it burns out before anyone notices. You watch your mother for signs. You check your brother's cough. You pray over your father's aching hip, the one he says is nothing but weather. You pay attention to how everyone holds their breath when someone forgets a word or stumbles on the step. They know. Even if they haven't heard her, they feel the shift. Like the house is holding something it didn't hold before. In your world, the belief is generational. The Banshee doesn't cry for just anyone. She's selective. She attaches herself to old families, the kind with stories deeper than surnames. O'Neill, O'Brien, O'Connor. But bloodlines are messy things, and the truth is, by now, no one's sure where she draws the line. Maybe she used to follow noble names, but nobility has long since drowned in the bog like everything else. Now, she follows grief, familiarity. She follows the rhythm of sorrow that repeats down family trees like bad luck. If she cried for your cousin, she might cry for you. If she cried for your grandmother, she'll cry again. And it changes you. Knowing, hearing her once means you never truly rest again. Every night is a question. Every creak is a possibility. You start watching the sky for signs. The way the moon sits, the birds that leave too early, the silence of dogs. You learn to count how many times you hear her and from how far. They say if she wails once, it's warning. Twice, it's a certainty. 3 times, and the person is already cold. Some say 7 wails, and it means the soul won't make it through purgatory. But you've never met anyone who counted past 3. When a Banshee screams, it doesn't matter if you're ready. It doesn't matter if the person about to die is a child, a mother, a drunk, or a saint. Death doesn't care who deserves more time. Neither does she. Her job isn't justice. Her job is announcement. And in your world, where so little is sure, where crops rot, wounds fester, and water betrays you with invisible poisons, the Banshee offers a terrible certainty. Someone will die. Prepare. Or don't. It won't matter. You've seen how people behave when they hear her. Some break down immediately, sobbing before the dying even starts, naming names in advance like they're casting lots. Others go quiet, stone-like, moving through the next few hours as though they've been handed a script written in blood. You've seen men abandon homes rather than be the one to find the body. You've seen mothers claw at their own faces, thinking maybe if they look mad enough, the Banshee will change her mind. She doesn't. And then there's the watching, the waiting, that hollow-eyed, sleepless vigilance. Once she's screamed, every cough is a threat. Every trip on a loose stone feels like fate. You stop letting the children go far from the house. You keep the fire higher than usual. You salt the windowsills and hang crosses in corners and burn herbs that smell like burning never left them. None of it works. But doing nothing feels like inviting her inside. You remember when your aunt heard the cry. She didn't speak for a full day. She just stared at the hearth, eyes glassy, muttering the names of her sons in a loop, as if speaking them would bind them to her longer. By morning, the youngest was dead. A fever, fast and cruel. And then, the crying came again. Not hers, not human, but that same wail out in the fields, this time closer, like the Banshee was passing the message along. a job half finished, another name on the list. There's no dignity in it, no clean deaths, no slow fades surrounded by loved ones singing. Most people die with dirt under their nails and fear in their eyes. The wail doesn't prepare you. It paralyzes, makes your skin itch and your stomach twist and your mouth dry out with the sour taste of inevitability. You start looking at your family differently. Which of us is it? Who will it take? You look at your grandmother and think maybe she's lived long enough. You look at your sister and hope she's not next. You look at yourself and wonder if the cry was for you, and no one will say it out loud. Some believe the Banshee cries not for one, but for many, that she senses the thinness of the veil and keens for an entire branch about to snap. A village hit by plague, a family swallowed by fire, a boat that won't return. Her wail is the beginning of an unraveling. Once she's cried, something must break. The day passes in silence. You don't speak unless you must. You move carefully. You notice things you didn't before. The way your father's hands tremble, the way your sister looks a little too pale. You wonder if they're noticing you in the same way. No one says her name. No one mentions the sound. But everyone is listening. The wail isn't just a sound. It's a sentence. And now, you're serving time. The wail is not just something you hear. It's something you wear, like wet wool clinging to your skin, tightening as it seeps in. It doesn't begin the way normal sounds begin. Not with a breath or a vocal cord warming up. Not with warning. It arrives mid-scream, already at full force, as if it's been happening forever and you've only just tuned in. There's no crescendo, no build. Just a wall of sound, ancient and exact, and once it hits you, you're never quite the same. You don't so much hear it with your ears as feel it behind your eyes. It bypasses the normal systems. No polite tap on the eardrum, no respectable route through logic or thought. It's an invasion. A full-body siege. Your heart skips once, then thuds like it's been dropped from a roof. Your throat tightens. Your skin prickles as if you've been kissed by a dozen dead mouths. The hairs on your neck stand up, but it's not fear yet. That comes later, when your mind catches up to what your body already knows, that this sound does not belong to the world you live in. There is a frequency to it that feels off. Not wrong exactly, just not made for human hearing. It's like a dog whistle for the soul. You've read, or someone has read to you, about something called infrasound. Those low, subaudible frequencies that can unsettle the stomach, make candles flicker, cause dread without any visible threat. The Banshee's wail is nothing like that. The Banshee doesn't work in subtle. She doesn't tap on the walls of your brain. She kicks them in. There is no mystery, only impact. When people talk about it afterward, they struggle for words. Some say it sounds like an animal being flayed alive, too shrill to be human, too deliberate to be a beast. Others claim it's like a mother mourning a child she's still holding, and some insist that it doesn't sound like a voice at all, but like grief itself has torn open and is now leaking into the night air. They're all correct, and they're all underestimating it. Because the truth is, the wail isn't meant to be understood. It's meant to undo. Your knees give out the first time you hear it full in the face. You hit the dirt before your mind even registers that your body's panicking. Something ancient inside you remembers what this sound means. Something deep in your spine, in the marrow passed down from ancestors who ran from fire and screamed into caves. It's not just fear, it's recognition. This is the sound of things ending, of the veil thinning, of the world rearranging itself to make room for death. You want to cover your ears, but it wouldn't help. The wail exists somewhere between sound and sensation. You could plug your ears with wax, bury your head in wool, press your palms against your skull until your arms ache, and still, it would slip through. It hums in your bones. It echoes in the blood. It curls around your lungs and tightens every time you try to breathe. By the time it's over, you feel wrung out, like your nerves have been washed and hung to dry in the cold. There are stories of people who go mad from hearing it. Not the soft, poetic madness of losing touch with reality, but the animal kind. Screaming at walls, chewing fingers, ripping hair, clawing at their own throats to dig the sound back out. You believe it. You've felt the edge of that unraveling. There's something about the tone that short-circuits thought. You forget where you are, who you are. You forget that your body has limits, and that your mind was ever separate from fear. Some say the Banshee only wails for others, that if you hear her, it's a warning, not a sentence. But others whisper that if you hear it directly, if her cry seems pointed at you like a spear, then the dying might be yours. You wonder what difference it makes. The effect is the same. Once you've heard it, something inside you is different, cracked, bruised, touched in a way that doesn't heal. You can still function afterward. Feed animals, cut peat, stir stew. But you're not whole. There's always a part of you listening, waiting, bracing for it to happen again. They've tried to explain it away, of course. The scholars, the scribes, the wandering priests with ink-stained hands. They say it's mass hysteria, a shared delusion, a folk belief that spreads like disease. But these men sleep in stone abbeys with thick walls and imported wine. They don't live beside death. They don't watch their children go blue in the night. They don't see the air bend around the Banshee's scream and feel the blood inside their heads throb in rhythm. They don't know. The villagers do. They describe the sound in hushed voices, trading notes as if trying to piece together a pattern that might save the next family. Some say her cry is lower when it's a man who'll die, sharper for a woman. Others claim the duration matters, that a long, unbroken wail means sudden death, while short, punctuated cries mean suffering first. No one agrees. They only agree that once it starts, it must end. And when it ends, someone is gone. You remember the sound more than the moment. You can't recall what you were wearing or what you were doing, only that the world snapped, like a string pulled too tight, like the air itself had split open. The scream came, and then there was only that. You could have been on fire and wouldn't have noticed. You could have been bleeding. Maybe you were. Later, your limbs trembled for hours. Your ears rang like bells cracked on funeral stone. You spoke little and slept less. The wail echoed long after the Banshee left. It lives in memory now, a permanent presence. Like a scar inside the skull. You fear hearing it again, but even more than that, you fear not hearing it next time. Because worse than knowing someone will die is not knowing at all. If sound could kill, this would be the final note. It doesn't just mark the end of a life, it marks the end of silence. The thing about a Banshee is she's not for everyone. She doesn't just show up for every last breath, or fall over every deathbed like a shroud with lungs. She's particular, bound by old allegiances and blood-deep contracts written in sorrow. Not all deaths get a soundtrack. Not all grief gets an escort. Some pass quietly, unnoticed even by their neighbors. Others are marked by a cry that splits the night in half. If you hear it, it means someone important is dying. Not important in the way the world defines it now, with wealth or titles carved into gravestones, but important in a deeper, more ancestral sense. Bloodlines, histories, the kind of names that outlived the mouths that first spoke them. In the oldest stories, she belonged to the noble Gaelic families, not the lords in silk imported from the continent, but the real ones. The warrior clans who held land, not because they were granted it, but because they fought for it, bled on it, buried their dead beneath it. Families with names like O'Neill, O'Brien, O'Connor, O'Grady, O'Donnell, names older than the churches they eventually got buried in. She wasn't just a random spirit screaming into the hedgerows. She was a kind of guardian, a terrifying, mournful one, but loyal in her own dreadful way. She wasn't always seen. Sometimes it was only the sound, a keening that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. But there are stories of her form, always just out of reach. A woman in white or gray, hair long and wild, combing it with fingers stained with time, old or young, or flickering between both, sometimes crying, sometimes silent until the scream bursts forth like something she can't keep in. They say she's tied to one family at a time, and when she wails, it's for one of theirs. It's a mark of belonging, but the kind you inherit with your funeral shroud already half woven. The legends vary. Some say the Banshee follows 5 great Irish families, others say 25. Some say each noble house has its own Banshee, a personal mourner passed down like an heirloom nobody asked for. Others claim that the Banshee is one entity, moving between the bloodlines like a messenger on a grim route she's walked for centuries. There are even tales of multiple Banshees wailing at once when someone truly great is about to die. 3 voices, 5, even 7, harmonizing in horror. And here's the part that unsettles you, quietly at first, then more deeply the longer you sit with it. Your surname. You hadn't thought much of it before. It's just letters, something you scribble at the bottom of parish documents, a way for the taxman to know who you are. But when you say it aloud, when you hear how the old men in the village pronounce it with that slow, heavy reverence, you feel something shift. It might not be one of the great names, but it's close. Close enough that people nod when they hear it. Close enough that the stories still cling to it like smoke and wool. You start tracing it back in your mind, reaching into the corners of stories half remembered from fireside talk. Your grandfather who died in his sleep after swearing he saw a woman standing by the stream. Your aunt who claimed to hear crying in the chimney 2 nights before your cousin drowned. The way no one ever questioned those things, just folded them into the rhythm of living and dying like weather or illness. They never said the word Banshee, but they didn't have to. Everyone knew what it meant. It gets worse when you realize no one outside the family hears it. The Banshee is exclusive. If she's wailing for someone in your bloodline, only your people can hear her. The neighbors might sleep peacefully through the night while your household trembles. It's not just grief that's passed down, it's access. You inherit the scream the same way you inherit cheekbones or curses or bad knees. You don't earn it, you're born into it, which means the scream doesn't belong to everyone. It belongs to you, and that's the hardest part to wrap your mind around. That something so ancient and terrible might be bound to your name, like a shadow you never noticed until it moved. You wonder how far the connection goes. If you change your name, do you lose her? If your blood is mixed, does she still come? And what about those who marry in? Are they safe? Or does she expand the circle with each union, each child, weaving new threads into her tapestry of screams? Some try to outrun it, of course. They change names, leave villages, move far from the old land, hoping distance is stronger than myth. But the stories follow. Even those who move abroad report hearing the wail, a sound that crosses seas and ignores borders. She doesn't care where you go. She cares who you are. And once she knows your name, she doesn't forget it. Now you think about it constantly. You wonder if your children will hear her one day, if they'll know what it means, if they'll be ready. You wonder if maybe, long after you're gone, she'll cry again. For your granddaughter, or your great-nephew, or someone who doesn't even know they belong to a bloodline that was once worth weeping over. Maybe she doesn't just mark death. Maybe she marks lineage. Maybe her scream is proof that someone still remembers. You thought she was just a ghost story. Now you know better. She's legacy. She's history. She's proof that your name still matters to something ancient and unrelenting. And when the time comes, when someone in your family slips from the living to the dead, she'll be there, wailing not out of malice, but because that's the bond. You don't choose a Banshee, but if she's chosen you, you belong to her until your name is forgotten. She's not what you think she is, not just a ghost. not just some wayward wisp of regret pacing the fog. The Banshee isn't the pale, floating cliché you summon when you hear the word specter. She's older than that, wilder. Her feet touch earth, but she doesn't belong to it. Her voice is a bridge, not a warning bell. And when she cries, it's not for your benefit. It's for the dying, or maybe the dead, or maybe something older still, buried deeper than memory. You call her a ghost because you don't know what else to name her. But the truth is, she doesn't fit any of your boxes. She breaks them. The name gives you a clue, if you know how to listen. Bean Sidhe, woman of the fairy mound, not ghost or spirit or witch, though she's been all of those in someone's story. She comes from the AOC, the people of the mounds, the hidden folk, the fair ones who live just beneath the skin of your world. Not the winged, twinkling things later tales turned them into, but the old ones, the dangerous ones, the ones you didn't name unless you had to, and never allowed. You didn't thank them. You didn't pray to them. You left offerings and hoped they passed your door. She belongs to them. Or maybe she is one of them. It depends who's telling it. Some say she was once mortal, a woman so soaked in sorrow that she became something else. Others say she was always more than human, sent from the other world to keep the boundary between life and death thin and trembling. She doesn't haunt for pleasure. She keens because the world demands it, because someone must witness the loss, and because the land remembers its dead, even if you don't. You don't find her in cities. She needs soil and silence. Her roots are tangled in the hills and burial mounds that still rise like old bones under the grass, even if no one remembers who lies beneath. The fairy mounds, Sidhe, dot the Irish countryside like punctuation marks, each one a doorway. You pass them on your way to market, mutter a quick blessing, and keep walking. You don't climb them. You don't dig. You don't whistle nearby after dark. Not unless you want something ancient to follow you home. Her cry is tied to those hills. You can almost feel the sound rising from the earth itself when she wails, like the land is exhaling grief, like something old is stretching in its sleep. Her voice has been here longer than your language, longer than the roads you walk or the stories you whisper. And she is always a woman. That part never changes. There's something essential in that, something primal. The sound of a woman mourning is older than myth. Before writing, before kingdoms, before stone tools, there were mothers wailing over dead children, sisters sobbing into riverbanks, wives clawing at their chests when the bodies didn't come back. The Banshee doesn't invent sorrow. She carries it, channels it, makes it impossible to ignore. And in that way, she isn't just supernatural. She's cultural. She's historical. She's the echo of every woman who had to watch and wait and break. In medieval Ireland, mourning wasn't quiet. It was performed, sharpened, almost ceremonial. Women would keen over the dead in rhythmic, high-pitched cries that made the air vibrate. Some were hired for it. Professional mourners. They would wail and chant and cry on behalf of the family, letting the community know that a life had ended, that the balance had shifted. It was a way to honor and a way to survive. If your grief was loud enough, maybe the gods would hear you. Maybe the dead would rest easier. Maybe you could bleed the pain out of your mouth before it poisoned your insides. The Banshee is a twisted echo of that ritual. She keens not at funerals, but before them. Her voice is the prophecy, the grief before the grief. She's not there to comfort. She's not there to help you process. She arrives to declare, to pronounce, to remind you that death is already walking, and she has seen its face. You don't invite her, you endure her, and yet she is never quite cruel. Unsettling, yes. Terrifying, often, but not malicious. She does not cause the death. She heralds it. She isn't the illness, or the blade, or the storm. She's the wind that follows, the echo of inevitability. And sometimes, when she cries, there's love in it, or something like it, a tenderness buried beneath the horror, as if she mourns not just the person, but the ending of a whole line of breath, as if she cares, in some strange, unreachable way. There are stories of her being seen brushing her hair by a stream, silently watching the home of someone marked to die. In those tales, she isn't screaming. She's waiting. A quiet presence. Dread in a cloak. In others, she tears her hair out, her face a mask of fury and despair. The shape she takes depends on the death she's mourning, young or old, violent or peaceful, expected or stolen. She mirrors the loss, reflects it back at you through the distortion of myth. You've spent your life thinking of her as a monster, something to fear. But now, with her cry still echoing in your chest, you're not so sure. She doesn't feel like a villain. She feels like consequence, like gravity, like a tide that rises only for you. She feels like memory, deep, inherited, sharp-edged. She feels like a warning stitched into your blood. She's not a ghost. She's not a fairy. She's not a demon, or a widow, or a myth made to scare children into obedience. She is all of those, and none. She is what happens when grief becomes sacred, when mourning becomes power, when death becomes personal. She is womanhood shaped into sound, sorrow given form, and a reminder that even the end has witnesses. And tonight, she's watching your door. You never want to see her. Hearing her is enough to splinter your nerves and soak your sleep in shadows. But seeing her, truly seeing her, is something that stays behind your eyes forever. Those who have looked too long tend not to speak about it afterward. If they survive the moment at all, they do so altered. The kind of change that doesn't show on the surface but seeps out in their silences. They avoid mirrors. They flinch at certain sounds. Some begin to mutter prayers in dead languages they never knew they knew. Because once you've seen the Banshee, your definition of reality begins to unravel, and everything ordinary begins to feel a little too fragile. She doesn't look like the things your modern mind conjures from films and costumes. The cartoon ghost draped in white bedsheets, or the shrieking prop you hang on porches in October. She's not theatrical. She's real. And real is worse. Because real doesn't care if you're ready. Real just arrives. The shape she takes is never quite fixed. Some say she appears as a young woman with long, flowing silver hair, radiant and mournful, like a bride widowed on her wedding night. Others speak of a veiled crone, hunched over and hollow-eyed, her back bowed by centuries of sorrow. In a few stories, she shifts form entirely, depending on who she's come for. Youth for the young, decay for the dying, beauty for the blind. You don't know which version is worse. The young one feels wrong, too pure, like innocence weaponized. The old one feels inevitable, like a prophecy wearing skin. Either way, you'll recognize her when you see her. She makes sure of that. Her eyes are the worst part, not because they're monstrous, but because they're human, too human, brimming with something deeper than pity, deeper than pain. Like she's seen every death that has ever happened, and she remembers them all. They don't glow. They don't burn. They weep. Even when her face is still, her eyes are leaking that unspoken knowing, and it cuts sharper than any scream. Looking into them is like staring into a hole in the world and realizing it's shaped like someone you love. Her hair spills like moonlight but moves like smoke, tangled, wild, and ancient. In some versions, she combs it with bone-handled brushes, each stroke a count closer to death. In others, it drips water, as if she's just emerged from a river no living person can see. Once, someone swore they saw brambles growing from it, sprouting and curling midair like her sorrow had roots. You try not to imagine the sound of them cracking as she moves. And then there's her dress. If that's even what it is, some say it's robes, others call it shrouds. Whatever the material, it clings like decay, It isn't stitched so much as grown around her. Tattered layers that ripple even when there's no wind, dragging along the ground with the soft hush of disturbed graves. In the right light, or maybe the wrong light, it appears wet, stained with something you hope is just time, but suspect is older than that. Some say it's blood, others say it's tears. You start to understand that, for her, there's no difference. She smells like things you were taught to fear but didn't understand. Not rot, exactly. Something subtler. Earth after rain, but wrong. Dampness that lingers too long in cellars where the dead are stored. The metallic tang of rusted iron mixed with something floral, something faded, like a wreath left too long on a coffin. Lilac crushed underfoot. It doesn't hit all at once. It creeps. First you catch a strange sweetness on the air, too delicate for the night. Then something deeper follows, earthy and iron heavy, the way old blood smells when it's been buried and forgotten. By the time you think to notice it, she's already there. She doesn't move like a person. She doesn't stumble or sway. She glides, or maybe she simply exists in multiple places at once, and your brain stitches it together as motion. Her arrival feels less like someone approaching and more like something blooming. 1 second she isn't there. The next, she fills the room, or the field, or the path outside your door. She doesn't knock. She doesn't speak. She looks, and sometimes, only sometimes, she raises her hand, palm outward, as if in greeting, or warning, or farewell. There are stories where she speaks, but no one ever remembers what she says. The words vanish from memory like breath on glass. You're left only with the weight of them, pressing behind your ribs. Some believe she speaks in a language no one living can understand. Others claim she doesn't speak at all, that it's your own fear giving her a voice. You find that somehow worse. And yet, for all her terror, she's beautiful. Not in the way you want to touch, but in the way you can't look away. Like a fire eating through the rafters of your home, or the moment a wave crests just before it swallows the boat. There's something sacred in it, something final. You understand why people once painted her into their myths, carved her into stone, whispered her into lullabies. She's not just an omen, she's a ritual. Seeing her means you've been marked. Maybe not for death yourself, but for the remembering of it. You'll never forget the way she stood, the way her hair moved without wind, the way her eyes burned with a sorrow too big for one woman to carry. And maybe she isn't one woman. Maybe she's all of them. Every mourner, every widow, every mother who screamed into the dirt while the world moved on without her. Maybe she is sorrow given form so the earth itself won't forget what it has taken. But tonight, she looks like a figure standing just beyond the tree line, and her eyes are already on you. It begins with a low hum, a sound you might mistake for wind threading through old trees or water moving under ice. It isn't loud, but it doesn't need to be. It touches something behind your ears, inside your chest, a note that vibrates without air. You freeze because your body recognizes it before your brain does. This is not the sound of weather, it's the sound of sorrow winding up its throat. The Banshee's song isn't one melody. It's many, layered and fragmented, like a choir falling apart in slow motion. You never hear it the same way twice. Some say she keens, that long, ululating cry rising and dipping, the voice of a mourner whose grief has outlived language. Others say she shrieks, a ragged, slicing sound that rips through the stillness like cloth torn too fast. Sometimes she whispers, barely audible, syllables that echo your name from places you can't see. But always, no matter what shape the sound takes, it carries a weight, like it's dragging centuries behind it. Like it isn't just about the person dying, it's about everyone who ever has. It's not music in the way you understand it. It doesn't follow a rhythm. It doesn't soothe. It's discordant, full of jagged edges and sudden silences. At first, You try to find a pattern in it, something to latch on to, but the noise defies you. The scream comes from nowhere and everywhere, moving through the walls, the floors, your own bones. You feel it more than hear it. Like being submerged. Like your breath isn't your own anymore. And then you remember. This is what keening once sounded like. Before it was legend, before it was a ghost story, it was real. Women, living, breathing, flesh and blood women, used to cry like this for the dead. In ancient Ireland, death didn't pass quietly. It wasn't hidden behind closed doors and polite words. It was howled into the air, offered up to the gods, the ancestors, the village. The sound was raw, layered with grief and fury, and something holy. The keener would stand beside the body, tearing her voice to shreds so the dead wouldn't walk alone. Sometimes, the family hired them. Sometimes, they came unasked, summoned by the reputation of the dead or the echo of suffering that called them like wolves to a wound. They knew how to channel loss, how to make it ring loud enough to shake the trees. It wasn't just mourning, it was performance, ritual, a way to rip the silence open, wide enough for the spirit to pass through. It mattered. It meant something. But that was when the keeners were human. The Banshee is something else. They say she is what happens when grief forgets how to die. A keener who kept keening long after her voice should have stopped. Maybe she mourned someone she couldn't let go. Maybe she wept so fiercely the gods took notice. Maybe she was never human at all, just something that slipped into the role when no one else could fill it. But now, her voice is legend. Her mourning never ends. Her grief is bottomless, and you're hearing it because someone close to you has just stepped onto the path with no return. You don't know if it's your brother, your mother, your child, or yourself. You only know that the moment the sound touched your skin, you were marked. You are no longer just a listener. You're part of her audience, part of her performance, part of the story being written in sound. Sometimes the cry is accompanied by the sound of weeping. Soft, irregular, almost human. But it doesn't comfort. It unsettles, because it doesn't seem to come from a body. It comes from the air itself, from the fire in the hearth that suddenly sputters, from the corners of the room that feel too dark, too deep. Occasionally, it becomes a chant, a repetitive moan that cycles through syllables you almost recognize. It burrows in your head like a melody you can't stop humming. And when you try to speak, to drown it out, your own voice feels foreign, small, useless. You begin to understand why people used to cover mirrors, why they opened windows to let the soul escape, why they whispered charms into pillows and painted their doors red. The Banshee's voice isn't just a warning. It's an invitation, a declaration. It announces that grief is en route, and you'd better make room. She is not coming to console you. She is coming to prepare the air for mourning, to carve out a space for absence. It's not just you who hears her. Not always. Sometimes whole families report the cry. Sometimes just one unlucky soul. If you're alone in the house, the silence after the scream is worse than the scream itself. It lingers like smoke, like something burned. Your ears ring with it, but no one else reacts. The dog doesn't bark. The baby doesn't stir. And that's when you know it was real. You've just joined the playlist. There's an ancient rhythm to this, one you're not supposed to understand. It doesn't follow modern logic. It follows bloodlines, sorrow, timing. The Banshee doesn't cry for every death, only the ones that echo deep enough, only the ones that shift the ground. Her songs aren't random. They are scored with precision, meant to be felt before they are heard. And once your family's name is on her lips, the music never really stops. It just waits. That's what's so terrifying about it. You think of music as beauty, as entertainment. But the Banshee's song isn't meant to be enjoyed, it's meant to be endured, survived. Her notes are shaped like knives. Her verses cut memory into the body. And if you're hearing her now, it means the concert has already started. The house feels colder, the walls feel thinner, and somewhere outside, in the place where the forest meets the fog, her voice rises again. Higher, harsher, unmistakable. You are not an audience anymore. You are the reason she sings. In a world where men wrote the rules and death wrote the endings, there was nothing more dangerous than a woman who cried too loudly, not cried politely, not wept into her apron like a proper widow, but sobbed with her whole body, screamed into the wind, clawed at the air like she was trying to rip open the sky. That kind of grief, the full-bodied, blood-boiling kind, frightened people. It wasn't just sorrow, it was spectacle. It cracked the surface of control, and medieval society, which clung to order like a child clutching a crucifix, did not take kindly to things that cracked. The Banshee was not born in a vacuum. She didn't crawl out of the ground one night fully formed, screeching and spectral. She was molded over centuries, shaped by whispers and suspicion, and the deep primal discomfort people feel when faced with a woman they cannot silence. A woman who keens in the dark isn't just mourning, she's interrupting. She's reminding everyone that death doesn't wait for decorum, and the world hated her for it. Real women once keened the dead. They were part of the death ritual, professional mourners who wailed so the family didn't have to. But over time, as religion tightened its grip and power grew more centralized, their presence started to look suspicious. Why were they so close to death? Why did they seem to know before it happened? Why did their cries sound more like prophecy than grief? And once a woman becomes a question, it's only a matter of time before she becomes a threat. You see it in the way laws changed, in the way church leaders condemned the practice of keening as unchristian, as pagan. The women who once stood at the center of communal mourning were pushed to the edges, then over the edge entirely. Where once their cries had been sacred, now they were seen as spells, tools of manipulation, signs of madness. They called it hysteria, of course, that old flexible label they liked to stick to anything feminine and inconvenient. If a woman grieved too hard, she was unwell. If she spoke to the wind, she was cursed. If she screamed at night, she was possessed. If she didn't cry at all, she was heartless. There was no safe version of femininity when pain was involved, only categories of danger. And so the Banshee became a useful fiction, a way to take the discomfort people felt around uncontrolled female sorrow and give it a face, make it other, make it monstrous, turn a mourner into a monster, and suddenly no one has to listen to her. They only have to fear her. It's easier to fear than to understand. Easier to believe that the cry you hear in the night is a spirit come to curse your house than to believe it might just be your neighbor, broken by loss and unable to pretend otherwise. The supernatural gave patriarchy cover. Wrap a woman in myth, and no one questions why she's alone in the woods. They just avoid her. Say she eats children. Say she seduces men to their deaths. Say her voice can kill. The truth is simpler and more unsettling. Her voice was never meant to kill. It was meant to mourn. You just never wanted to hear it. You begin to see how grief became dangerous, how a woman's sorrow, when not properly controlled or contained, became suspect. A grieving man was tragic. A grieving woman was suspicious, especially if she didn't stop, especially if she made noise, especially if she refused to grieve on your schedule. It was only a short step from sorrow to suspicion, and from suspicion to firewood. Witch trials didn't spring from nowhere. They were fed by centuries of fear. Fear of what women knew, what they whispered, how they bled, how they cried. A woman in pain threatened the illusion of peace. Her emotions weren't private. They spilled out, infected others. She could whip a crowd into terror, bend a village into paranoia, make people believe something unholy was afoot. And if she happened to cry the night before someone died, that wasn't coincidence. That was cause. Better to silence her. Better to call her something else. Better to say she wasn't even human. And so the Banshee became a tool of folklore and a warning to the living, not just of death, but of behavior, of how not to be. Don't be too loud. Don't be too sad. Don't be alone in the forest. Don't mourn without permission. Don't scream unless someone tells you to. Don't make people uncomfortable, even when your world is ending. Especially then, you were taught to fear the Banshee, but really, you were taught to fear becoming her. Becoming the woman no one can reason with. The woman who won't be quiet. The woman who shows up uninvited with a mouth full of grief and eyes full of knowledge. The woman who refuses to grieve the way they want her to. The woman who turns mourning into rebellion. Because here's the secret. The Banshee doesn't just warn you someone will die. She reminds you that someone already has, and she demands you acknowledge it. That's why she terrifies them. Not because she causes death, but because she insists on witnessing it. And in a world that punishes women for feeling too much, for seeing too much, for saying what no one else dares to say, witnessing is a radical act. Crying is dangerous, especially when the cry is for someone the world would rather forget. Especially when the one doing the crying is no longer willing to stop. The idea creeps in slowly, like mold on the inside of a wooden beam. You don't notice it at first. Just a creak here, a soft spot there, something not quite right in the walls of your life. But then someone dies, and then another. And somewhere in the hollow silence after their last breath, you hear it. That sound. The one that doesn't belong to this world. The cry that says it wasn't random. That death has your family on speed dial. That maybe the Banshee isn't following you out of whim or pity. Maybe she's bound to your blood. You've heard the stories. Not the ones told in church. Those are scrubbed clean and polished with incense. The other stories, the whispered ones, the ones that say some families are marked, not just by tragedy, but by something deeper, older, something baked into the bone, a stain passed down like a cursed heirloom, so familiar you mistake it for furniture. These aren't ordinary deaths, the stories say. They're debts, paid off generation by generation, and you don't even know who signed the contract. People call it a curse, but that's too tidy. A curse implies one sharp moment, one angry witch or jealous rival or drunken priest muttering hexes into the dark. This isn't a lightning strike. This is rot in the roots. It's the sense that no matter how far your family moves, how many times they change their names or paint over the past, something is still watching, waiting, listening for the cry that starts the chain all over again. It makes you think of original sin. Not the cartoonish, apple-biting kind, but the concept itself. The idea that you're born stained. That before you even open your mouth to cry, you're already guilty of something someone else did. That death has been following your line since the first gasp of your first ancestor, and no one told you until it was too late. There's comfort in thinking the Banshee just shows up when people die, but the older stories say otherwise. They say she clings to families like a shadow. She doesn't follow the dying. She follows the doomed. And if your last name is one of hers, you're never really alone. She may not wail every night, but she's always nearby, watching the generations pile up like stones on a grave. You start to look at your family differently. You remember your uncle's accident, the one no one could explain. You remember how your grandmother used to mutter to herself near the window, how her eyes seemed always fixed on something far away. You remember how no one talked about what happened to your cousin Maeve, how everyone flinched when someone brought up the night before. You didn't understand it then. Now, you wonder if they were trying to protect you, or if they just didn't want to admit they heard the cry too. Maybe it's not about punishment. Maybe it's about witness. Maybe your great-grandmother saw something she shouldn't have, Or did something no one would admit? Maybe she buried a secret so deep it clawed its way into the bloodline. And now the Banshee mourns not just for the dead, but for the truth that never got out. A scream is a message after all. What if the message isn't just, death is coming? What if it's, this never ended? The Banshee's presence isn't always a curse in the Hollywood sense. She doesn't set fire to your house or turn your eyes black. She doesn't need to. She just cries. She just reminds you that death isn't random, that grief runs on schedule, that the past isn't buried. It's just waiting its turn. Some families build their legacies on land and gold. Others build theirs on silence and screams. You wonder what it would feel like to be free of it, to live a life without dread seeping through the cracks, to hear the wind at night and not immediately go still, listening for that telltale sound. You wonder if it's even possible, if maybe the Banshee doesn't leave because no one ever lets go. Grief becomes ritual. Ritual becomes myth. Myth becomes inheritance. And suddenly, your entire identity is built on echoes. But not every family hears her. Not every bloodline is bound to the sound, which means the Banshee is choosing, or someone chose for her. Maybe it was an oath broken, a promise left to rot, a betrayal so deep it carved its own trench through time. Maybe it was nothing at all, just bad luck shaped like lineage. Either way, the result is the same. You carry the weight. You grow up expecting tragedy the way others expect birthdays. You listen for footsteps in the fog. You check behind you in mirrors. You avoid certain hills at night because your mother did, and her mother before her, and no one ever explains why. You inherit their fear. You polish it like silver, and when the next scream comes, you brace yourself. Not just for death, but for recognition, because it's never just one voice. It's the chorus of every woman who cried for your family, and it doesn't stop with you, unless you're the last. The quiet is not peaceful. It presses in, thick and damp like wool soaked in river water, heavy on the ears and heavier on the chest. You live alone, or close enough. Neighbors are a mile away, and when the mist rolls in off the bog, you couldn't find your way to them, even if the devil himself was pulling your soul by the teeth. You can't see the road from your window. You don't have a window, not really. Just a hole stuffed with sheep's wool to keep the rain from finding its way into your bones. The wind howls through it anyway, low and steady, like a breath against the back of your neck. Some nights, it sounds like your name. Some nights, you answer it. This isn't romantic countryside. This is not the Ireland of postcards and whiskey ads. This is peat smoke and rot, and the wet stink of animal bedding. This is the kind of isolation that strips a person raw. There are days when you don't speak to another human being, when your voice dries up in your throat like something buried. You hum, just to prove you're still there. You talk to the chickens. You talk to the fire. You talk to the dead, if you've lost enough of them, which you probably have. And if the wind cries back, you don't tell anyone. Because what if it wasn't the wind? What if it was her? The Banshee thrives out here, not just because it's quiet, but because it's lonely. Loneliness is a perfect echo chamber. It takes every sound and bends it, stretches it, makes it grow fangs, and whisper your worst thoughts back to you. You start to hear things that aren't there. Footsteps when there's no path. Weeping when there's no one left to mourn. The scratch of nails on the door. When you don't own a dog and your cat's been dead for years. You try not to open the door when it happens. You tell yourself it's a trick of the wind. But the wind doesn't know your brother's name, and she said it. People think hallucinations are about madness. They're not. They're about environment. Stress, trauma, malnutrition, long hours in the dark with nothing but your fears for company. You see things when your brain is tired of reality and goes looking for answers it can live with. And in rural medieval Ireland, reality was often unbearable. Starvation, disease, childbirth that turned blood into burial, fathers buried by fever, mothers by exhaustion, infants by chance. There were no explanations that made sense, except her. It was easier to believe in the Banshee than to believe that life was this cruel without reason. She gave shape to the chaos. If you heard her scream before someone died, then death wasn't random. It was scheduled. It was earned. It was part of a pattern, even if it was a pattern written in screams and smoke. In a way, that was comforting. Terrifying, yes, but comforting. You weren't alone. Something was watching. Something new. Something mourned with you. You lit a candle, even if you had no oil. You carved crosses into the door frame. You left out bread and milk, even if it meant you didn't eat that night. Because it wasn't just about belief. It was about survival. Superstition kept you alive longer than most doctors. Ritual gave you control, or the illusion of it. And in a world where winter could kill a family before sunrise, illusion was better than nothing. But there were no real protections, not against her. She didn't need to enter your home to ruin it. Her voice carried across valleys, through stone, through blood. You could be half asleep, dreaming of summer, and wake with tears already on your face, heart beating like a rabbit under a hawk's shadow, because you knew something terrible had already happened. You knew who was gone. And if you didn't, she would make sure you found out. Out here, there were no second opinions, no priests quick enough to absolve, no neighbors fast enough to contradict your ears. If you heard her, that was it. No one questioned your sanity. They questioned whose funeral to prepare for. Because in these hills, in these valleys, belief wasn't optional. It was weather. It was air. It was woven into the grass and passed through your bloodline like eye color. Some people went mad. Not the flailing, foaming kind, but the quiet rot that sets in when grief and fear ferment together for too long. They'd stop speaking, or start too much. They'd dig pits behind their cottages to hide from sounds only they heard. They'd burn herbs no one recognized and mutter names they refused to explain. They'd live 10, 20 more years that way, skin stretched too thin, eyes always turned toward the dusk, because no one ever heard the Banshee at dawn. She was a creature of the edge hours, the in-between moments when the veil supposedly thinned. Twilight, midnight, the border of waking and dreaming. Those were the hours when sound didn't need form, when grief didn't need a body, and when you lived alone with no one to pull you back into reality. The edge became home. You felt it already. That brush of chill in the back of your throat. That certainty that someone's watching from just beyond the firelight. That moment where you convince yourself it was nothing, that you didn't hear the cry, that you didn't recognize the name she whispered, even though it was your sister's, even though she's been coughing for days, even though you left her alone last night. The land remembers, the wind remembers, and the farther you live from others, the closer you are to her. The first thing you do is shut the door. It slams hard against the frame, rattling the iron latch you installed yourself with trembling hands and a prayer half remembered from your grandmother's whispered mutterings. You pile sacks of barley, bundles of peat, your father's rusted tools, anything with weight, against it, as if mass could stop myth. You think maybe she won't come in if you barricade every opening. You shove rags into the cracks between the stones, stuff sheep's wool around the hearth, plug the chimney with a coat you haven't worn since last winter. You tell yourself it's just a precaution. You tell yourself it's just wind. You lie, and then you hear her again. Not a scream this time. A hum, low and distant, like the beginning of a funeral lament, or the sound of a string pulled too tight and left to tremble in the air. You cover your ears. You press your palms hard against your head until your jaw aches and the pressure makes stars burst behind your eyes. But you still hear it. It doesn't need your ears. It's not sound in the way thunder is sound. It's inside you now. You scream back, thinking maybe your voice will drown hers out. You shout every name you know, every saint, every deity, every ancestor. You scream curses and pleas and nonsense, but it doesn't work. She isn't louder than you. She just doesn't need to be. Her cry doesn't fight your voice. It waits. And when you stop, because you will stop, breathless and hoarse and shaking, it slides back in like water under a door. You build a fire, a big one. You throw in herbs, bones, things you were told would cleanse or banish. The smoke stings your eyes, makes your throat raw. But the cry only grows clearer, as if the flame lights it rather than burns it away. You begin to understand that this is not something you can hide from. She doesn't knock. She doesn't need permission. She doesn't travel by road or footstep. She exists, like grief does. Sudden, invasive, and utterly without regard for your preparations. You step outside, because some primitive part of you still believes that open air might scatter her voice, that the wind will pull it apart, send it over the sea, dissipate it into the clouds. But it's stronger out here. The trees hum with it. The grass twitches. The air is thicker now, not colder, just heavier, like it's holding something unsaid. You can't tell where the sound is coming from. It's in every direction and none. It doesn't bounce. It absorbs. The hills know her. The stones remember her. The earth itself has memorized the shape of her voice. And when she screams, the world does not resist. It listens. So you run. You run through the fields, tripping over roots, panting, your legs aching like they've been lashed. You head toward the next village, 5 miles through the bog and uphill. You think maybe if you can cross the stream she won't follow. Maybe water breaks the spell. Maybe people will be loud enough to drown her out. But halfway there, you hear it again, closer now, as if your running was a signal, not a shield. It's not in front of you. It's not behind. It's inside the wind. You fall. You lie in the muck, trembling, your breath catching in your chest. Not because you're tired, though you are, but because for one moment, you thought you saw her. Not fully. Just a blur at the edge of the mist. A figure standing too still. A woman wrapped in the kind of silence that breaks the spine of the night. And before you could turn, she was gone. But the sound wasn't. It stays with you. Even when it stops, it stays. Like how a bell echoes long after it's rung. Like how mourning lives in a house long after the funeral. You don't need her to scream again to know it's coming. Something in you has changed. You've been marked. You try to recall who in your family looks pale, who's been coughing, who's overdue returning from the fields. You try to decide whether it's worse to lose someone you love or be the one who dies next. There is no safe room, no blessed ground, no fortress of faith strong enough to mute her. She has cried from cliffs, from wells, from shadowed trees and rooftops. She has wailed from within walls, from the mouth of the wind, from the silence after a prayer. She does not need to cross thresholds. Her voice is not bound by body or distance. She is an echo wrapped in prophecy, a mourning wrapped in sound. People think they can explain it, that maybe it's just grief made audible, that hearing her is a metaphor for knowing death is close, that the mind invents her to cope with what it cannot bear. But metaphors don't scream loud enough to split bone. Illusions don't leave the smell of lilac and decay in your doorway. Dreams don't make your animals panic and your skin blister with cold. You were told once, by someone long dead, that her cry was a gift. That knowing was better than not knowing. That to be warned was to be blessed. But this doesn't feel like a blessing. It feels like being hunted by sound. And the worst part? You don't know if she's crying for someone else or for you. The scream doesn't stop death. It doesn't give you time to prepare. It doesn't offer bargaining or escape. It simply arrives before the body goes cold. A note held too long in a dirge no one asked to hear. And when it ends, You don't feel relief. You feel a tightening, a dreadful patience in the air, as though the world is simply waiting for the rest of it to catch up, and then someone dies. It's not dramatic, usually. There is no bolt from the sky or ghastly accident. It's quieter than you'd expect. A breath that doesn't return. A child that won't wake. A man who simply slumps against the doorframe and slides to the earth without a sound. You don't need to check for a pulse. You just know. Because the scream has already told you. You search for signs anyway. Because that's what the living do. You try to disprove the certainty pressing into your spine. You place a mirror to the lips. You whisper their name. You touch their skin, hoping it's still warm, but it isn't. It's already turning that uncanny shade of waxen gray, the one you recognize even if you've never seen it before. You don't scream. You've already heard enough of those tonight. The neighbors will come, eventually. Word travels fast when death is involved. They'll arrive with candles and veils, with hands full of herbs and eyes full of sympathy edged with fear. Because they know it wasn't just death. It was that death. The kind with warning. The kind marked by the cry. And if she visited your home, what's stopping her from visiting theirs next? They won't say it out loud. But they'll keep their children close. They'll bless your doorway twice before they enter. They'll cast sideways glances at your fields, your hearth, your surviving kin, as if any of those might carry the residue of the scream. The body is prepared quickly. You don't linger over questions. There's no coroner, no autopsy. The Banshee screamed, and now someone's dead. What more is there to investigate? You wash the corpse, careful and reverent, using water drawn before dawn and heated just enough to chase the chill. You close the eyes, if they haven't closed themselves, and bind the jaw with linen so it doesn't hang open like it wants to scream back. You keep a candle burning at the head of the body. You place coins on the eyelids. You cover mirrors, if you own any. You make sure the cats are locked out, because if one leaps across the corpse, it's said the dead will rise. And you can't bear the thought of that. The wake is a vigil of both mourning and defense. You don't leave the body alone, not for a second. Not because you think it'll walk, but because something else might come back for it. Or worse, through it. The women sing. You thought you'd forgotten those sounds, but they come back too easily, cracked from the throat like they were waiting behind your teeth all along. The keening is not beautiful. It is not soft. It is ugly and raw and full of salt. It's a sound scraped from the bottom of the human soul, full of all the words we're not allowed to say when someone dies. The rage, the fear, the things you wish you'd told them, the shame in surviving, and beneath it, always, the echo of the first scream. You wonder, sitting beside the corpse, how long she had been watching. Did she cry because of what was about to happen? Or because it had already begun? Did her scream summon the end, or simply bow before it? The village priest says her wail is not evil, not exactly, that she is just a messenger, a mourner, a soul too tied to the living to leave us alone, that even angels sometimes cry in terrible ways, but he doesn't speak that boldly at night, and you've never once heard him say it while the wind was howling. You dig the grave with your hands, because the ground is half frozen and the tools are too dull. It takes most of the day. Your knuckles bleed. The others offer to help, but you refuse, not out of pride, but because this is the only thing you can still do that feels like control. The coffin is simple. Wood, if you're lucky, or just a shroud if you're not. You lower the body in. You cover it with dirt. You don't look away. And still, you wait, because she screamed once already, and sometimes, she screams again. That's the part no one wants to talk about. The part whispered behind hands, behind closed doors, behind the cracked lips of the elderly who've seen too many winters. That once the scream has touched your family, it can cling, like a stain, like smoke, like breath on a window that never quite fades. So you listen. In the quiet, in the long space after grief, when everyone else has gone home and the candles have burned out, you sit in your doorway with your head resting on the lintel and your eyes scanning the fog. You tell yourself it's over, but your ears remember, and they'll never stop listening. You keep telling yourself it was just the once. One scream, one night, one death. But it doesn't matter. The sound changed something, not just in the air, or in your family, or even in the rhythm of your small, enclosed life. It changed you. And the thing no one says, the thing you only understand once it's too late, is that the scream never leaves. Not really. It gets into your bones, like a fever that didn't quite break. You start to hear things that aren't there. Or maybe they are. And that's worse. The creak of floorboards, the hiss of wind through reeds, the whimper of animals just before nightfall. Every sound stretches longer than it should, echoes wider than you expect. Your ears have been trained now, twisted by grief and terror into instruments of constant alert. You think you're being careful, that you're managing it, but you flinch when people speak too loudly, and sometimes when they don't speak at all. You sleep lightly, if at all, ears prickling at every groan of the wood and scratch at the window. You don't live in silence anymore. You live in a constant state of listening, like you're waiting for the second verse of a song that destroyed the first. At first, people understand. They've heard stories. They've seen loss stretch a person thin. They bring food, or blessings, or wine, trying to soften the edges. But eventually, they stop coming. You talk too much about things they don't want to believe in. You ask them if they've ever heard something they couldn't explain. You wait for them to nod. They don't. You see the distance in their eyes. They think you're letting it rot you. You are. You stop walking near the edge of the village. Something about open spaces makes the air feel thinner, like the Wail could travel farther, sneak in faster. You avoid certain paths at dusk. You double back more often than necessary, checking the hedgerows and branches for movement. You stop trusting the fog. And every time you hear someone cough, or feel a fever in someone's palm, or hear a door close too softly in the middle of the night, your stomach drops. Not again, you think. Not so soon, but no one else hears her. Not this time. They go on, laughing and tilling and raising children who don't know what it means to have the world pierced open by a sound older than time. You begin to wonder if it really happened at all. Maybe it was just panic, just shock. A hallucination drawn from grief, like an echo in a cave that convinces itself it's not alone. But that's what she wants, isn't it? That doubt, that twisting, that slow erosion of what you once trusted most, your own mind. Because if she's not real, then what are you afraid of? If she is, then you've already been marked, and there's no escape from what's been seen. You start dreaming of her, not always directly. Sometimes she's just there in the background, veiled, silent, standing beneath a tree or behind a gravestone. Sometimes she looks like someone you knew. Sometimes she looks like you. And when you wake, your throat hurts, as if you were screaming in your sleep, trying to answer something you couldn't bear to hear. You try to talk to the old women, the ones with too many wrinkles to pretend the world is safe, the ones who light candles on windowsills and still leave bread out on Samhain. But even they look away when you mention her. One of them presses her rosary to your palm and says, "If you heard her once, you'll hear her again, but you won't know when." And that's the worst part. She doesn't say anything else. You don't return the rosary. Sometimes you think about leaving, crossing the sea, changing your name, starting over somewhere the wind carries different ghosts. But you can't unhear what you heard. You carry it with you, like a shard under the skin. And what if she follows? Or worse, what if she doesn't, and something else does? Something you brought with you, not outside, but inside, etched into the space between your ears. You hear that a boy 2 villages over stopped speaking after a death in the family. His mother says he saw something outside his window, something pale and weeping. But the priest says it was just the fever, just the shock. You believe the boy. You believe him so completely that it makes your chest hurt. You consider going to see him, but what would you even say? She never really leaves? Instead, you stay home more. Keep the fire going. Keep salt at the door and sprigs of yarrow in the rafters. You stop laughing. Not because you're sad all the time, but because laughter feels too loud, like it might attract attention. You whisper when you pray. You barely speak at all when the moon is full. And still, beneath everything, a question festers. Did the scream come for the person who died, or did it come for you? Because you survived, technically, but you're not really whole anymore. You're haunted, not by a ghost, but by what she meant. The idea that death doesn't always come unannounced, that sometimes it sends a message, and sometimes the message is a scream that buries itself in your memory, in your blood, in your future. You understand now why people go mad with grief, why they stare too long at shadows, why they keep their windows nailed shut even in summer. You used to think the Banshee was a story. Now, you think she might be a sentence, and you're just waiting to hear it spoken again. In the flickering half-light of the chapel, you kneel and try to remember the right words. The Latin feels foreign in your mouth, heavy and awkward, like stones meant for someone else's prayer. The wooden pew groans beneath you, and for a moment, you think it's echoing her, that sound. But it's only your imagination, or maybe it isn't. You don't trust your ears anymore. You don't even trust the silence. The priest watches you from behind the altar, eyes shadowed under the low arch of his brow. He doesn't ask why you've come. He already knows. He's heard the stories too. You confess. Not everything. How could you? There aren't words for some things, and if there were, you suspect saying them aloud would make them real in a way you're not ready for. So you talk around it. Grief, guilt, the weight of sound. You say you're afraid, that something dark touched your family, that it marked you. He listens without moving, except for the slow twitch of his jaw, like he's grinding his teeth in time with your heartbeat. And then he tells you to pray harder. The church, you realize, is not built for this kind of fear. Not the creeping, ancestral kind. Not the scream that knows your name kind. Its walls are made of dogma and stone, and neither absorbs the kind of story you carry. When you mention the Wail, he stiffens, then recites a practiced line. Superstition is a tool of the devil. He says it like a shield, like a spell. But he doesn't meet your eyes, because he's heard it too, not the scream itself. He'd never admit that. But the murmurs, the late-night weeping from cottages on the edge of town, the way the graveyard crows vanish a day before a funeral, the fact that some deaths come preceded by dreams, by chills, by sounds no living woman could make. He won't put it in a sermon, but he crosses himself twice before bed. The church arrived in Ireland with fire and water, baptism and burning. It tried to overwrite the old ways, stamping saints over gods and graves. It renamed the rivers and mapped the fairy hills like they could be reasoned with. But some things resisted. Some things dug deeper. And now you live in a place where stained glass windows glow beside burial mounds, and the cross and the cairn exist in a quiet, uneasy truce. The priest tells you to turn from your fear, that God watches over all things, that the dead should be mourned, not feared. He hands you a scrap of scripture, something about light and eternity. It feels thin between your fingers, too clean. You fold it in half and tuck it into your sleeve, but it doesn't keep the cold out, because while the church speaks of angels and judgment, the countryside speaks of something older, of a woman with silver hair and a scream that follows bloodlines like a family crest. The bean seed hay, the wailing woman, not a demon, not quite, but not a servant of heaven either. something in between, something both feared and respected. You ask the priest what she is. He doesn't answer, but he does start locking the church doors earlier than usual. You wonder sometimes if the Banshee came before sin, if her cry is older than guilt. The church speaks of damnation like a punishment you earn, but her scream feels inevitable, like thunder or gravity. She doesn't judge, she doesn't forgive, she warns, and that's somehow worse, because it means she's seen what's coming, and nothing can stop it. Christianity wants you to believe death is a beginning, that what comes next is brighter, purer, eternal. But in the dark corners of your mind, you think about her, about the way she keens at the edge of the field, hair soaked in dew, voice wet with mourning, and you can't help but think that maybe death isn't a doorway. Maybe it's just another scream waiting to happen. You start noticing things at Mass. The way old women mutter blessings under their breath that aren't in the book. The way the candles flicker during certain readings. The way no one sits near the back row anymore, ever since someone said they saw her standing there during a funeral service last spring. You see a child flinch during a hymn and refuse to sing again. You hear a man cough 3 pews over, and you freeze. No one wants to say it, but belief is a double-edged thing. The church teaches faith is protection, but in a land soaked with stories and shadow, faith sometimes feeds fear. Because once you believe in salvation, you must also believe in the need to be saved. And if God is watching, you can't help but wonder, why didn't he stop the scream? You stop going to church for a while. You say it's because you're tired, busy, that your grief is private. But really, it's because the chapel feels hollow now, like an echo chamber that can't hold what's really haunting you. You try lighting your own candles, reciting your own prayers. You mix psalms with fragments of lullabies your grandmother once sang. You leave milk at the windowsill. You cover your mirrors. Some nights, you still kneel beside your bed and clasp your hands. But the words you whisper aren't always in Latin anymore, and you're not sure who you're saying them to. Because when the church offers you eternity, but the wind outside carries something older, something closer, something that screams, you start to wonder if heaven is really what's waiting, or if it's just the thing the Banshee weeps for before you go. She does not fit neatly into the margins of a manuscript. Try as they might, the men with ink-stained fingers could never quite contain her. She slips between lines, haunts footnotes, and lingers in the unspoken spaces between fact and fable. The monks tried first, of course. They heard her cries echoing through the stone walls of their abbeys, heard the farmers speak of a woman in white, her face veiled and her voice like a funeral bell. So they wrote, hesitantly, with crosses drawn in the margins and careful phrases like Daemonia Femina and Vox Lamentationis. They thought if they named her, they could tame her. They were wrong, because she wasn't just noise in the wind or some pagan relic to be buried under a psalm. She was louder than their bells, older than their Latin, and far more persistent. They called her a demon when her presence didn't match their scriptures, but even as they condemned her, they listened for her. One monk wrote of a keening shade, heard the night before his abbot died. Another claimed he saw her standing at the edge of a graveyard, hair matted with dew, eyes fixed on the church door. He confessed it at dawn, trembling, and burned the page, but not before someone copied it. She became a problem in the margins, a theological splinter, too loud to ignore, too strange to accept. Then the scholars came. Men with quills and credentials, arriving centuries later, determined to civilize the Banshee into something explainable. They stripped away the myth and clothed her in anthropology. Oral tradition, they said, with the tone of a surgeon describing a tumor. A feminine personification of pre-Christian mourning culture. They measured the pitch of her scream, the frequency of her appearances, the genealogy of the families she haunted. They made maps, charts, comparisons. A metaphor for death, they concluded, satisfied. But metaphors don't leave footprints in the mud outside your cottage. Metaphors don't smell like lilacs and rot. They miss the point entirely. In trying to explain her, they shrunk her. She was never meant to fit inside a thesis. She was grief made flesh, sorrow you could hear before it arrived. No amount of academic distance could dull the way she made people feel. The cold that crawled up the spine, the tightening in the throat, the knowledge that someone's time was running out. Her presence wasn't theoretical. It was personal. Still, they tried. They called her a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, a projection of communal mourning, a survival of the Celtic death cults, a psychological construct, a ghost, perhaps, or a weather anomaly mistaken for a voice. Some even called her mass hysteria, as if whole villages wept in concert for no reason at all. They wanted a cause they could footnote. But how do you cite fear that moves like a shadow through generations? In the countryside, no one cared what the scholars said. They'd seen her. She might appear as a girl washing bloody clothes by a stream, or a veiled crone sitting beneath a blackthorn tree, or a silent figure weeping at the crossroads. Each village had its version. Each family had a tale. They didn't ask for proof because they already had something better. Memory. Living, breathing, ancestral memory, passed down like a warning whispered into a cradle. And when someone tried to argue her out of existence with a chalkboard and a theory, they'd just shake their heads. You can't explain away a scream you've heard. Even the skeptics hesitated. They laughed when the topic came up, sure, but only in daylight. They'd mock the old stories over ale and bread, call her a relic, a woman's tale, a shadow in the fog. But when they walked home alone on fog-draped paths, they moved faster, checked over their shoulders, avoided certain trees, because deep down, they knew that some things live outside of logic. The Banshee wasn't something you believed in. She was something you hoped you wouldn't meet. Legends grew because people needed them to, but hers stayed because people couldn't escape her. She became part of the land, part of the air, the sound of mourning woven into the soil. And even when cities rose and books replaced stories, she didn't fade. She adapted. She moved from firelit cottages to whispered internet threads, from hedgeside tales to grainy recordings no one could explain. The name changed. The fear didn't. She remains elusive, because she isn't meant to be caught. She's not a woman. She's not a ghost. She's the echo that comes before a door opens in the night. And every time a man tries to put her in a box, she tears it open with a cry that has no beginning and no end. She's not on the edge of a medieval field anymore. She's in your headphones, on your screen, flickering in the background of a horror film you swear isn't that scary until the moment a woman screams in a way no human throat should allow, and suddenly your whole body remembers something it never lived through. She's had a makeover, sure. Fewer moss-stained robes, more streaming rights. But the cry is the same. The one that doesn't ask for permission. The one that doesn't wait for you to believe in it. Because the Banshee didn't die with Gaelic nobility. She diversified. She slipped through the cracks in colonization, through folklore smashed flat by doctrine and empire. She crossed oceans, shedding old names and borrowing new ones. Now she haunts alleyways in Bogota, hotel corridors in Manila, lonely stretches of road in Kansas. They call her La Llorona in Latin America, a weeping mother searching for drowned children. They call her the White Lady in the Philippines, in Germany, in the American South, always pale, always silent, until she isn't. In Japan, she's the woman in the surgical mask, asking if you think she's pretty. And in Thailand, she floats above the rice paddies, hollow-eyed and still bleeding. Different names, same scream, and always, always a woman. Not because women are inherently spectral, but because grief has always been expected to wear a dress. Because sorrow from a man becomes a monument, but sorrow from a woman becomes a warning. The Banshee didn't invent that. She just weaponized it. Modern culture has tried to make her safer. She's been put in horror movies, draped in CGI, fed to audiences as spooky entertainment. But even wrapped in jump scare packaging, something slips through. Something older than the plot. It's not the gore. It's not the ghost. It's the sound. The wail. That long, rising scream that starts like a sob and ends like a siren. It reaches a frequency that bypasses language. You don't understand it. You feel it. Somewhere in your spine, something cold unfurls. Not fear of death. Exactly. Something more primitive. Fear of knowing. Because when she screams, something is already lost. Sound as fear isn't new. We flinch at breaking glass, at gunshots, at fire alarms. But the Banshee's cry is different. It's not an emergency you can run from. It's the grief after. The moment when adrenaline runs dry, and the silence is full of names you'll never say again. Her voice is mourning without a mouth. It's why she still shows up in stories, even now. It's why you can be scrolling through a ghost subreddit at 2 a.m. and come across a post that says, "Heard a woman screaming outside but no one was there," and a chill runs up your arm before your brain can tell you it's probably just a fox. You know better. The stories change, but they keep circling the same drain. A woman, a loss, a sound. Sometimes she warns, sometimes she follows, sometimes she just watches. Always, she exists on the threshold, between the living and the dead, between reason and something that laughs in its face. She doesn't need to be seen anymore. She just needs to be heard. Even science flinches at her. Infrasound, that's what they call it now. Low-frequency vibration below the range of human hearing that still causes unease, dread, even nausea. They've recorded it in haunted houses, empty caves, abandoned buildings. They say it can make your eyes vibrate just enough to see a figure that isn't there. It's rational, they say, measurable, explainable, but it still feels like grief. So we invent more versions of her. We stitch her together out of folklore and fear. We hand her new names and new faces, let her hitch rides in the back seats of cars or sob beside lakes at night. We pretend she's just a ghost story because if we admit she's more than that she's a pattern, a mirror, a scream that keeps finding us no matter the century, we'd have to ask harder questions, like why we keep imagining women as warnings, or why we need death to have a sound at all. But still, she comes. Not every night, not for everyone, but she's here, humming at the edge of memory, echoing in superstition, tucked between the pixels of a YouTube video titled Real Paranormal Encounter that you don't finish watching because something about it feels off. She's on the subway platform where a woman cries and no one moves. In the hallway outside your door when the wind moans like a voice you almost recognize. She's not waiting to be believed. She's just waiting to be heard. You live in a building where no one knows your name. The hallway lights flicker like they're trying to forget something, and the elevator groans every time it carries another tired body to another stacked box in the sky. Outside, sirens wail like wounded metal birds, but no one flinches. Noise is constant here. Traffic, drilling, phones buzzing, voices echoing through vent shafts. So much sound, you stop hearing it. But at 3:13 a.m., the silence becomes unbearable because it doesn't belong. That's when you realize you're listening for something else. It's not the scream you expect, not the full-bodied, soul-splitting banshee howl from the stories, not the blood-curdling shriek from the cliffs of County Clare or the one that made your grandfather's hands shake when he tried to talk about it. What you're listening for now is absence, the pause, the breath before the crash, that loaded silence that settles between your shoulders like cold fingers pressing down. Because grief doesn't always scream anymore. In the city, it lingers. It hums in radiators and crouches in stairwells. It leaks through the drywall in apartments where no one talks and everyone knows too much. You pass neighbors every day whose eyes don't lift from the floor People who could be mourning and you'd never know. Their banshees don't wail. They whisper. They text at 2 a.m. and delete it before pressing send. They scroll through photos they swore they deleted. They stare at ceilings and wonder if the sound they just heard was plumbing or something older, something watching. Crowded cities are supposed to protect you from old ghosts. Too much light. Too many witnesses. Ghost stories belong to forests and crumbling castles and remote cottages where you mistake wind for weeping. But grief doesn't care about geography. You could be 20 floors up, surrounded by thousands, and still feel like you're the only one left behind. That's where she waits now. In the boxed-in lives of people too busy to mourn properly. In the places you go to escape and find you brought it all with you. She doesn't wear white anymore. She wears earbuds and ripped coats and an expression that dares you to ask her what's wrong. Sometimes she takes the train with you. Sometimes she stands across the platform and stares, unblinking, until your stop comes and you pretend not to notice the ache behind your ribs. She blends in because the city taught her how to disappear without going anywhere. Just like you. No one knocks on your door when something bad happens. You find out online. A tag, a message, a post that ends with, "Fly high." The scream doesn't come from outside anymore. It comes from inside your phone. From the moment you stare at a name and forget how breathing works, that's when you hear her. Not with your ears, with your stomach, with your chest, with every nerve that remembers what it's like to feel safe and suddenly doesn't. They say banshees were for noble families once. Gaelic bloodlines. Ancient names. But who carries noble blood now? Who doesn't have a lineage of loss by this point? It's not about castles anymore. It's about closets full of clothes that don't smell like anyone anymore. Phones with voicemails you can't delete. Keys on a ring that don't fit any door still standing. We've all inherited the scream. Some just hear it louder. You thought moving to the city would make it easier. More distractions, more people. Less sky. But the grief here is concentrated, densely packed and poorly insulated. You can hear someone crying through the wall, and you don't know if it's real, or memory, or just a sound you've imagined so many times it finally took shape. You don't check. You don't knock. Because part of you is afraid they'll say, "Come in." You wouldn't know what to say if they did. There's no ceremony for modern mourning. No keening women in black shawls. No neighbors bringing bread. Just emails marked unread and flowers that arrive too late. No banshee wailing in the night. Just a gap in conversation where someone's name used to be. And that silence is worse. It lasts longer. It stains deeper. It settles into the bones of your building until even the walls start to sound tired. You hear a thud above you. Maybe someone dropped something. Maybe they didn't. You wait, holding your breath. Not for the scream, but for what comes after. The shuffle, the voice, the proof of life. Nothing. Just the hum of the fridge and the city outside chewing its own tail. That's when the silence sharpens. When it turns from absence to omen. You want to open the window and scream just to hear something alive come back. But you don't. You listen, because you know what it means now. Not just in folklore. Not just in stories told by firelight. You know what it means to hear nothing where there should be someone. You know what it means to feel haunted without ever seeing a ghost. You know that she's still here, even if she doesn't scream anymore. She doesn't need to. You do. You hold your phone like it's a weapon. But it's not. It's just glass and wires, and a battery that barely holds charge anymore, a fragile rectangle you think might keep you safe because you can press a button and trap the world inside it. That's the lie of this age. If you can record it, you control it. If you can upload it, you've conquered it. And so when the sound comes, but thin at first, like the whine of a train braking on faraway tracks, you don't pray, you don't hide. You open the camera app, the scream rises, and your thumb shakes against the record button. The air vibrates. The walls seem to breathe. You don't even know if the microphone can catch it. Maybe it's too high, too low, too much like something your bones understand better than your ears. But you keep filming anyway, because proof matters now. People don't believe words anymore. They need video. They need the shaky footage at 2 in the morning, the grainy shadow across the alley, the evidence that your terror wasn't just in your head. You want to prove it happened. You want them to see her too. That's your first mistake. The camera doesn't obey. The lens fogs, even though your apartment isn't cold. The screen glitches, a smear of pixels tearing across her absence, as though the device itself is trying to look away. You tap, swipe, curse, but the image doesn't hold, and still the sound grows. Your chest rattles with it. The hairs on your arm rise. Every instinct says put the phone down, but you don't. You keep it raised, desperate for something you'll be able to play back in the daylight when the memory feels like madness. But you already know, deep down, there won't be anything on the file except static. Because some things are stronger when unseen. Surveillance has convinced you the world can't hide from itself anymore. Cameras on every corner, drones buzzing like mechanical flies, live streams that turn every stranger into a witness. But what happens when you point a lens at something older than the concept of proof? What happens when you try to compress grief into pixels? You get a blank screen, or worse, you get yourself reflected back, mouth open, eyes wide, caught in a silence that doesn't belong to you. And maybe, just maybe, you catch a flicker, a shape bending the air, a face pressed too close to the glass, and then your battery dies, even though it was at 83% a moment ago. You tell yourself you'll check the footage later, but you already know what you'll see. A black frame, a hiss of interference. Maybe a sound if you turn the volume high enough, though it won't sound like a woman. It'll sound like something inside your own ribcage tearing open. No one else will hear it. They'll just shrug. Foxes, they'll say. A woman screaming at the bar down the street. And then they'll ask why you look so pale, why you keep staring at the corner of the room like someone's standing there. You don't film the Wail because she isn't meant for evidence. She's meant for memory, for story, for the kind of terror that doesn't need a playback button because it's carved into you. The Banshee was never a spectacle. She was a verdict. Trying to capture her is like trying to film your own death certificate. You might succeed, but what would you do with it? Replay it at parties? Post it online between cooking videos and memes? Proof doesn't comfort. Proof corrodes. You think about all the other stories. Urban legends caught on dash cams, shaky clips of faces in windows, distorted audio files where the scream peaks so high it nearly splits the speakers. Most are fake, of course. Edited, performed. But some aren't. Some carry that same sickness in the sound, that same too loud silence between notes. You can feel it even through the buffering lag, the kind of thing that shouldn't transfer through wires, but does anyway. The kind of thing that survives compression, data loss, format updates. The kind of thing that survives you, because she doesn't care if you prove her. She doesn't need an audience. She only needs you. The recording won't protect you. It won't explain her. It won't stop her from coming back. All it will do is remind you, over and over again, that you heard her once. And once is enough. The phone is just a mirror now, one that reflects a sound you can't unhear. You press play and hold it close, desperate to convince yourself it's all in your imagination. But each time you hear the static, your body remembers the scream that came before it. Your stomach knots. Your teeth ache. And suddenly, the silence in the room feels too loud. That's when you realize you weren't filming her at all. You were filming yourself. And what you've captured, what you'll always capture, is the look on your own face when you realized the scream wasn't outside anymore. It was already in you. You try to tell them. You sit across from your friend in the clatter of a cafe, steam curling up from chipped mugs, and you say it as gently as you can. You heard something. Something not human. You describe the way it split the night, the way it clung to your ribs, The way the silence afterward felt heavier than the scream itself. You keep your voice low, careful, waiting for their eyes to widen, for them to lean in and whisper that they've heard it too. Instead, they laugh, not cruelly, just the nervous laugh people make when they don't know what to do with something they don't believe in. They tell you it was a fox, an argument, a nightmare. They say anything except the truth that they don't want to know. You try again with someone else, a coworker, late at night, walking out of the office with you into the hollow glow of streetlights. You say, "Have you ever heard something strange at night? Like someone crying but not close, and not far either." You phrase it like a joke, like a passing thought, because you don't want to sound mad. They shake their head, pull their coat tighter, say, "City's full of weirdos," and disappear down the subway stairs. You're left standing there, stomach sinking, because the sound you wanted them to admit to hearing has already started again in the back of your mind. It's lonelier than you thought it would be, carrying this sound around. You wonder if that's part of the curse, not just the grief itself, but the isolation of it, the way it sticks to you, marking you as someone who knows too much. Every conversation feels like shouting into a void. You see pity in their eyes, sometimes annoyance, but never recognition. Until the night you stop trying to convince them. Until the night it convinces them for you. You're sitting in a friend's apartment, telling yourself you won't bring it up this time. You'll drink, talk about work, laugh at a show, be normal for once. You're halfway through a story when you notice it. The silence between words, the pause, the way the air shifts, the way sound seems to fold in on itself like fabric being torn. You go rigid, you know what's coming, and then it arrives. That cry, high, low, everything at once. It blooms out of nowhere, rattling the glass in the windows, pressing into your chest until you can't breathe. Your friend freezes. Their glass tips over, spilling dark wine across the table. They turn toward you slowly, face drained of color, eyes wide and wet. They heard it. You don't need to ask. You can see it in the way their shoulders curl inward, in the way they're already crying without knowing why. The scream has reached them now, wrapped around their throat like a cord. You should feel relief. You should feel vindicated. Instead, you feel sick, because you realize this was never about belief. It was about infection. You passed it on. By telling them, by putting the shape of it in their mind, you opened the door, and now it's too late to close it. Your friend whispers, "What was that?" But you know no answer will matter. They've been marked. The scream doesn't fade once it finds you. It roots itself in memory, blossoms in silence. Tonight they'll lie in bed, listening for it. Tomorrow, they'll jump at the sound of wind against the window. Next week, they'll dream of a woman they've never met, standing in the corner of their room with her hair dripping like river moss. You've given them a gift no one wants. The knowledge that death announces itself, and that you can hear it coming, and it doesn't stop there. You tell yourself you'll keep quiet from now on, that you won't drag anyone else into this, but the fear has already reshaped you. People notice. They ask why you flinch at certain noises, why you stare too long into empty rooms. You slip. You mention her again. You warn someone else. You see the same disbelief, then the same silence, then, eventually, the same look when the sound reaches them too. The scream is contagious, not like a cold, not like something you can quarantine or cure. It spreads in the telling, in the memory, in the simple act of sharing your dread. Once someone knows to listen, they'll hear it. Maybe not tonight, maybe not for weeks, but when it comes, they'll remember you. They'll remember your words. They'll remember how you tried to warn them, and they'll hate you for it. Because grief is cruel that way. It doesn't want to be born alone. It drags everyone with it, one by one, until the silence before the scream hangs over entire families, entire circles of friends, entire cities. The Banshee doesn't need to haunt every doorstep. She just needs to whisper in a single ear and let the echo do the rest. You don't know when it will stop, or if it ever does. All you know is that now, when you look at your friend across the room, you see your own fear mirrored back. You see the recognition in their eyes, the same haunted waiting. You open the door together, and now you're both standing on the threshold. The cry has become a chorus, and death is already listening. You tell yourself it's over. You're still here, after all. Breathing, moving, eating when you remember to, working when you have to. The scream didn't split your skull. The Banshee didn't drag you into the ground. Death brushed close, but it passed you by. That should feel like survival, like victory, but it doesn't. It feels like carrying a wound no one else can see. A wound that never scabs, never heals, only hums beneath the skin whenever the world goes quiet enough. Because you may have survived the Wail, but survival isn't the same as freedom. At first, you try to live normally. You go back to your routines, cling to them like driftwood, coffee in the morning, work, small talk with strangers who don't see the tremor in your hands. But nights are worse. Nights are impossible. You dread the moment the house settles, the hum of the refrigerator softens, the pipes stop groaning. That's when the silence arrives, heavy and unnatural, pressing against the windows like fog trying to seep through. And in that silence, memory wakes up. Not a sound exactly, not fresh, but something lodged in the marrow of you, replaying itself whether you want it to or not. You hear it again, not always full and raw like before. Sometimes it's just a fragment, a pitch that doesn't belong in the wind. Sometimes it's only the way your own breath falters when you remember the first time it pierced you. Sometimes you wonder if it's all in your head now, if what broke inside you is simply playing tricks, like an echo chamber made out of trauma. But that doesn't make it easier. That makes it worse, because how do you fight something your body insists on remembering? You move cities. You pack your things, leave behind the places that reek of loss, the fields or the apartments or the roads where she might still linger. You start fresh, somewhere new, somewhere louder. But the noise only covers, never erases. Sirens wail in the distance, and you stiffen. A neighbor's baby cries, and your stomach knots. A song drifts through a cracked window at just the wrong key, and you can't breathe. You leave the room, excuse yourself, swallow explanations no one would understand. You left the landscape, but you didn't leave her, because she was never just in the land. She was in you. The Banshee was never meant to kill you outright. That would be too clean. She was meant to remind you, again and again, that death waits in every corner, that grief is never finished, that once you've heard her, you can never unhear her. Her cry is less about terror than it is about ruin. Not the ruin of life, but of peace. You don't die, but you never rest. You don't collapse, but you never fully stand. And people notice. They notice in the way you never sleep deeply, always waking at the slightest sound. They notice in the way you watch others with a kind of wary tenderness, as if every conversation might be the last. They notice the way your laugh has changed, shorter, edged, like it can't stretch all the way anymore. You don't tell them why. You don't say, "I heard her once." You just carry it. A secret you can't unload because the moment you share it, you risk passing it on. That's the cruelest part. Survival makes you a carrier. You wonder if this was always the point. Not to kill, not even to warn, but to fracture. To leave a line running through you like a fault in stone, invisible to the eye but ready to split open at any moment. You live, but you're not whole. And the Wail is no longer out there in the dark, waiting in bogs or hills. It's lodged in your nervous system, vibrating in your bones. You're not running from her anymore. You're running from yourself. So maybe you survived. But survival doesn't mean safety. It doesn't mean peace. It doesn't mean you escaped. Because when you wake at night, slick with sweat, ears straining against silence that feels heavier than sound, you realize the truth. She doesn't need to scream again. She only needed to do it once. The story was never really about her. That's the secret you only realize at the end, when the terror has worn down into exhaustion, when the silence has stretched long enough to make you start questioning what you heard at all. She didn't invent grief. She didn't summon death. She didn't bring tragedy into your house like smoke creeping under a door. Those things were already there. The Banshee was just the sound we gave them, the voice that carried the weight we couldn't hold in our own throats. She screamed because someone had to. And maybe, deep down, we always knew it was really us. In the old days, they called them keeners, women who sang their grief over the dead in voices so raw they stripped the air itself bare. They weren't demons. They weren't curses. They were mourners, professionals of sorrow, giving shape to pain too large to fit inside the living. People paid them to cry on their behalf, to let loose a storm of lament that said, "This life mattered, this loss burns, this house will never be whole again." Maybe the Banshee was just the keener taken further, turned inside out by centuries of death and fear, until she became a ghost no one could silence. Because what was medieval Ireland, except a country where loss was daily? Famine, plague, childbirth, violence. Every family knew the taste of mourning. You couldn't live without brushing against death. And yet you still had to keep moving, still had to milk cows and cut peat and light fires. You couldn't collapse every time the world took another piece of you, but you needed somewhere to put the grief, so you put it in her. You gave it hair like silver, eyes like rivers, a scream that carried across valleys. She wasn't a visitor from outside. She was what spilled out of us when the weight got too much. The scream was never about terror. Not really. Terror is quick, sharp, like a knife drawn in an alley. Her sound is slower, heavier. It's mourning, stretched into infinity. It's the moment after death, when the body is still warm, but the room has already gone cold. It's the breath you take before you cry and realize you might never stop. She isn't here to scare you. She's here to remind you. To remind you that grief doesn't vanish when the burial is done, that sorrow doesn't evaporate just because life keeps going. She is grief given permanence, and that's why she never left. Not when the church arrived, not when cities rose, not even now, when the world hums with electricity and the dead are buried under marble instead of soil. Because grief never left. We still carry it, unprocessed, folded into ourselves like letters never opened. We still inherit it, passed down in silences at dinner tables, in the stories our parents refuse to tell, in the way our hearts race at certain names we've never met. Generational fear, ancestral sorrow, these are just new names for the same sound. She is the echo of every unspoken thing we couldn't admit out loud. You've lived long enough with it to know the Banshee doesn't need to appear to be real. She's in the cracks of your own chest, in the way your breath catches when you see an empty chair at the table, in the ache that flares up when you remember someone's laugh without meaning to, in the nights when the silence becomes unbearable and you find yourself on the edge of sound, waiting for something to break inside you. The wail is already here. It always was. So maybe that's the final truth. Maybe she was never outside the cottage, never in the mist, never in the trees at all. Maybe she was always in us, the voice we tried to smother until it grew so loud it had to split itself free. Maybe we created her, not as punishment, but as survival. Because you can only carry so much grief before you need to scream, and sometimes the scream needs a face, which means you don't escape her. You become her. Every time you cry for someone gone, every time you mourn in the dark where no one else can hear, every time you swallow a scream that rises anyway, You're closer to her than you realize. She isn't warning you of death. She's showing you what it sounds like to live with it. And maybe that's what unsettles you most. Not that the Banshee exists, but that one day, when the silence grows too heavy and the grief too sharp, it won't be her voice splitting the night. It will be yours.